For me, the title of this event, Rebuilding Nepal, denotes, as does the film, kind of the extraordinary hope and possibility that comes along with a tragedy like this, and that hope really begins in the kind of volunteerism and the capacity to deliver relief that does exist on the ground in Nepal, especially among the networks that Mayor Gold was describing, that ION has exemplified, right, of politically savvy, technically sophisticated, and energetic youth. And that hope also brings the possibility that this kind of local, on-the-ground capacity and goodwill could become the backbone of a longer-term, sustainable, and just rebuilding process. I also wanted to say that for me, Rebuilding Nepal also denotes the fantastic work that's being done by the Toronto Nepali community to forge linkages, right, for grassroots relief efforts, as we're doing today. I mean, we're part of a massive, effective, diasporic global initiative, right, which is outside the purview of more formal apparatuses of the state or international aid. So our efforts today are directed toward supporting an excellent, well-researched initiative to provide immediate relief. And I really think that this kind of well-networked grassroots organizations have distinct advantages in terms of the capacity to deliver relief, right? That because they know the social contexts well, they often have personal relationships with beneficiary communities, even in some of those remote areas you've seen in the film. And since they're comprised of local volunteers, they're not going to go away, right? They're not going to go away once the immediate relief is delivered. They're there for the long haul, and they can get involved in long-term rebuilding.
There's the poverty, there's also poor governance. There's this history of poor governance in Nepal, which has created this political vacuum at this particular moment, which is what makes it so dangerous. And in the absence of a constitution, we also then don't have functioning federal states. We haven't had federal elections ever. That just hasn't been set up. And we haven't had local elections in 14 years now. So people feel quite protective about it and want to support the government as we move from relief to rebuilding. And I understand that sentiment and I agree with it completely. And yet I think we need to have a very robust debate among Nepalis and Nepal experts about how do we support the project of reconstruction in a way that's truly democratic, that supports the elected officials, that helps them become more responsive, that helps them sort of find their role in this, because they really took a back seat in the beginning. And we need to figure out how we work together with the state, with the various state actors, and with people, so groups like ION, other citizens. And I think the groups in Toronto really responded as citizens of Nepal to see, what is our role, and also how do we strengthen people through this exercise, so that rebuilding has to be participatory. It has to empower the areas that are being rebuilt. We have to not just build back better, which is the cliche about building back, but build back in a really responsible way, so that we have preparedness becomes part of our daily life.
Is there anything that you can draw from the history of how nations of different economic statuses have responded to these sorts of calamities, and how Nepal in particular can learn from it, emulate some aspects of it, and also pitfalls to avoid going forward?
Right now there's a big debate going on in Nepal about Haiti. It's being bandied around a lot because Nepal, like Haiti, gets a lot of foreign aid. And so the government has responded to this fear that we will just be flooded with internationals working on their own with a parallel structure, with no coordination, which is what happened in Haiti. So the government has tried, and in very crude ways, but I think they'll figure it out eventually, to find some way to coordinate by forming clusters, by having thematic groups working together. And so that is now kicking in very, very slowly.
In addition to state failure or poor governance, there seem to be deeply entrenched socioeconomic inequities, that definitely are gendered, that have been quite prevalent over time, that then also impact who then is most vulnerable after a natural disaster.
What are some of, not just emotional ways or psychological ways, but more material ways in which you continue to keep the spirit of volunteerism alive so that you continue to, have this solid base of volunteers who continue to work with the communities in dispatching tents and tarps and medical supplies and food and so on and so forth?
I'm concerned that we're going to have people living in the equivalent of FEMA temporary housing forever because we have not more immediately moved into addressing how can people learn how to rebuild using as many local materials with as much attention to earthquake security, earthquake resistance now.
But first, let's foreground. Let's put those real houses in real places at our picture.
But how will post-quake village rebuilding processes articulate or relate to state reconstruction processes that have been underway for the last 10 years?
How do we rebuild as a responsible and democratically functioning society?